Hey everyone, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like to help. Now for a story that will really move you. The Revenge of the Betrayed Bride. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Patrick's Cathedral in downtown Miami, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floor where Victoria Campbell stood frozen. 30 minutes. That's all that separated her from what she'd believed would be the happiest moment of her life. Her hand trembled as she pressed it against the cold stone wall, the sound of masculine laughter drifting from the adjoining room where her fiancé Matthew Reed was preparing with his groomsmen. She'd come looking for him, wanting one last private moment before their ceremony, but the words she heard through the thin wall made her blood turn to ice. "Honestly, guys, I can barely stomach kissing her anymore," Matthew's voice carried clearly through the wall, followed by cruel laughter. "Every time she looks at me with those puppy dog eyes and says, 'I love you,' I want to vomit. But hey, the payoff will be worth it." Victoria's designer wedding dress suddenly felt like a shroud as she listened to Jake's response. "Man, you deserve an Oscar for this performance. I've never seen anyone fake love so convincingly." "It's all about thinking of the money," Matthew continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction. 2 years of pretending to care about her boring stories, her pathetic need for validation, her daddy issues. But look where it got me. I'm about to marry into one of Miami's wealthiest families. The bouquet of white daisies, her favorite flowers that he'd claimed to love too, slipped from Victoria's numb fingers and scattered across the floor. Each petal felt like a piece of her heart breaking away. Stephen's voice joined the conversation. "But what about when you're actually married? Won't she expect, more intimacy?" Matthew's laugh was like broken glass. "I'll just close my eyes and think about the inheritance. Besides, she's so pathetically grateful for any attention, she'll never suspect a thing. Victoria Campbell is too soft, too trusting, too stupid to ever be dangerous." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. 2 years, 2 years of what she'd thought was the most beautiful love story, reduced to a calculated con game. Every whispered, "I love you," every romantic gesture, every moment of intimacy, all lies. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else emerged in Victoria Campbell's heart. Something cold, methodical, and infinitely more dangerous than Matthew could ever imagine. He wanted to play games? Fine. But he'd just made one fatal mistake. He'd underestimated the wrong woman. Victoria's legs carried her to the bride's preparation room as if in a trance, her mind reeling backward through 2 years of what she now realized had been an elaborate performance. She sank into the ornate chair before her vanity mirror, staring at her reflection, the hopeful bride with tears threatening to ruin her makeup. The memory of their first meeting played in her mind like a corrupted film. The Children's Hospital charity auction at the Four Seasons in Coral Gables, where Miami's elite gathered to spend money and feel virtuous. She'd been wearing her mother's emerald necklace, feeling elegant but lonely among the social climbers and fortune hunters who usually surrounded her. Then Matthew had approached her at the silent auction table, not even knowing who she was at first. Or so she'd thought. "Those are beautiful earrings," he'd said, his smile warm and genuine seeming. "They bring out the gold flecks in your eyes." She'd been charmed by his attention to detail, by how he'd listened when she talked about her work with the hospital foundation, how he'd remembered she preferred white wine to red. For weeks, he'd courted her with old-fashioned romance, handwritten notes delivered to her office, picnics in Bayfront Park, long walks along South Beach, where they'd talked about everything and nothing. He knew exactly what he was doing, Victoria whispered to her reflection now, understanding flooding through her. Every gesture had been calculated. The way he'd accidentally mentioned his modest apartment in Kendall when she'd assumed he lived in a luxury building, how he'd insisted on paying for their dates, despite clearly struggling financially, earning her respect for his pride and independence. She remembered the night he'd first told her he loved her, 3 months into their relationship. They'd been watching the sunset from the pier at Bill Baggs Cape Florida State Park, and he'd turned to her with such apparent vulnerability in his eyes. "Victoria, I need you to know something," he'd said, taking her hands in his. "I've never felt like this about anyone. You make me want to be a better man." The memory that had once made her heart soar now made her nauseous. Even his vulnerability had been a weapon, designed to make her feel special, chosen, irreplaceable. Her phone buzzed with a text from her maid of honor, Eleanor. 10 minutes, beautiful. Are you ready to become Mrs. Reed? Mrs. Reed. The name she'd practiced writing 1,000 times, dreaming of their future together. The future where she'd thought they'd build a family, grow old together, create a love story worthy of the fairy tales she'd believed in. Instead, she was about to become Mrs. Fool, but as Victoria stared at her reflection, she saw something that would have terrified Matthew Reed if he'd been smart enough to look for it. Behind the tears and shock, behind the devastating heartbreak, something steel-hard and unforgiving was crystallizing in her chest. Matthew Reed thought he was marrying a naive little rich girl. He was about to discover he'd chosen the wrong Campbell to underestimate. Victoria pressed her ear back to the wall, forcing herself to listen to more of the conversation that was dismantling everything she'd believed about her life. The voices were becoming more animated now, emboldened by champagne and the intoxication of their perceived success. "Tell them about the debts," Jake's voice urged, and Victoria heard the clink of glasses. "Come on, Matt. Tell them how brilliant this really was." Matthew's voice took on a boastful tone that Victoria had never heard before. "Okay, but this stays between us. When I met Victoria, I was drowning. I owed money to some very unforgiving people. $200,000 from some bad investments and worse poker games. I had 30 days to pay or face serious consequences, if you know what I mean." Victoria's hand flew to her throat. She'd never known he'd been in financial trouble. During their entire courtship, he'd seemed stable, successful, working at a respectable law firm in downtown Miami. "I was literally researching bankruptcy lawyers when I saw her picture in Miami Scene magazine at that charity auction," Matthew continued. Campbell Industries heiress, single, gorgeous, and according to the article, still looking for true love after a series of disappointing relationships with fortune hunters. The irony was so cruel, Victoria almost laughed. She'd been interviewed for that article about young philanthropists, and she'd specifically mentioned how careful she was about men who might be interested in her money rather than her heart. "The research phase took me weeks," Matthew went on, his voice growing more excited. "I learned everything about her. Her favorite flowers, white daisies, not roses. Her love of indie films and jazz music. Her insecurity about not having finished her master's degree because she'd left school to help her father after her mother's death. Her desperate need to feel like someone loved her for herself, not her trust fund. Each revelation felt like a scalpel cutting deeper into Victoria's soul. He'd weaponized her vulnerabilities, turned her own words against her. The stories she'd shared in intimate moments, thinking she was building trust with the man she loved, had been intelligence gathering for his con. "But here's the beautiful part," Matthew continued, and Victoria could hear him pacing now. "In 18 months, I've not only paid off all my debts, but I've used her connections to build a client base worth millions. Her father's business associates have thrown more high-profile cases my way than I could have gotten in 10 years on my own." Stephen whistled low. "How much are we talking about here?" "Conservative estimate? I've made about $3 million in fees from cases that came through Campbell connections. Plus, she got me the inside track on the Meridian development project. When that goes through, I'm looking at a 7-figure payday." Victoria's breath caught. The Meridian project was her father's pet venture, a massive mixed-use development in Aventura. Matthew had been helping with the legal aspects, and she'd assumed it was because of his expertise. Now she realized her father had only included him as a favor to her. "And the best part," Matthew's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, "is that she's so grateful to have found someone who loves her for herself that she never questions anything. Tomorrow night, we'll be in the penthouse suite at the Ritz in Paris, and she'll sign the papers giving me power of attorney for our joint accounts while we're on our 3-month honeymoon." 3 months? Jake sounded incredulous. "Most people take 2 weeks. Most people aren't married to Campbell Industries royalty. While we're touring Europe, I'll have complete access to liquidate assets, make investments, basically play with more money than most people see in a lifetime. And she'll be so blissfully happy playing house in European hotels that she won't pay attention to the fine print." The room fell silent for a moment, and Victoria could practically hear them contemplating the audacity of Matthew's plan. Finally, Stephen spoke. "And you're sure she'll never figure it out? What if she catches on?" Matthew's laugh was the cruelest sound Victoria had ever heard. Victoria Campbell couldn't catch a cold, let alone catch me in a sophisticated financial operation. She's book smart, but world stupid. Besides, by the time we get back from Europe, it'll be too late for her to do anything about it, even if she did grow a brain cell. Victoria's hands were shaking so violently now that she had to brace herself against the wall. But beneath the devastation, beneath the humiliation, a cold clarity was beginning to form. Matthew Reed thought he was the predator in this relationship. He was about to learn that he'd made a fatal error in judgment about who exactly he was dealing with. Victoria's fingers flew across her phone screen as she typed an urgent message to her father. Emergency. Need you at the church now. Don't let anyone see you come to the bride's room. Trust me, Daddy. Please. Andrew Campbell had built his empire on instinct and the ability to read between lines. Within 5 minutes, he was slipping into the bride's preparation room, his silver hair slightly disheveled from hurrying, his sharp blue eyes immediately assessing his daughter's state. Victoria, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse than a ghost, Daddy. I've seen the truth. Her voice was steady now, the initial shock crystallizing into something harder and more focused. I need you to listen to something, and I need you to stay calm. She led him to the wall adjoining the groomsman's room, where Matthew's voice was still audible, now discussing their honeymoon plans with gleeful anticipation. And the beauty of it is, she'll be so busy playing the perfect wife that she won't notice when I start moving larger sums. By the time we're back in Miami, I'll have enough liquid assets to disappear completely, if I need to. Andrew Campbell's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, a cold fury that reminded Victoria why he'd never lost a business negotiation in 30 years. Jake's voice came through clearly. What about divorce? Won't she take half of everything? Prenup, Matthew replied smugly. Her lawyer suggested it to protect her assets, but I convinced her it was unromantic. So we're going in clean, which means when I file for divorce in a year or two, I keep everything I've accumulated. And believe me, that's going to be substantial. Andrew's jaw tightened as he listened to Matthew detail how he planned to leverage Campbell Industries' connections for personal gain while married to Victoria. When the conversation finally shifted to other topics, Andrew pulled his daughter into the far corner of the room, his voice low and controlled. How long have you known? About 10 minutes. I came to find him for a pre-ceremony moment and heard... Victoria's voice broke slightly. Everything, Daddy. 2 years of my life, and it was all a lie. Andrew studied his daughter's face, seeing not just the heartbreak, but the steel forming beneath it. This was his daughter, his brilliant, compassionate, but often underestimated daughter, and she was angrier than he'd ever seen her. What do you want to do? He asked carefully. Victoria's green eyes met his, and for a moment, Andrew saw himself looking back. The same calculation, the same strategic mind that had built their family empire. I want to destroy him, she said quietly. But I want to do it right. I want him to lose everything he thinks he's gaining, and I want him to know that I'm the one who took it all away. Andrew nodded slowly. That's going to require patience, and intelligence, and perfect execution. I have all three. It's also going to require you to marry him today and play the role of devoted wife while we build our case. Victoria's breath caught. Marry him? After everything I just heard? Think about it strategically, sweetheart. Right now, he thinks he's won. If you confront him today, he'll disappear, take what he can, and you'll spend years in litigation trying to recover assets. But if you marry him, if you give him exactly what he thinks he wants, I can control the game, Victoria finished, understanding beginning to dawn. You can control everything. As his wife, you'll have legal access to his activities. You can monitor every move he makes, document every illegal transfer, build an airtight case that will not only get your money back, but destroy his reputation and career permanently. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, the magnitude of what her father was suggesting settling over her. Then she straightened her shoulders, and Andrew saw the Campbell steel shine in her eyes. How long would I have to maintain the charade? However long it takes to hang him with his own rope. Could be months, could be a year. Can you do it? Victoria thought about Matthew's cruel laughter, his casual dismissal of her intelligence, his cold calculation in manipulating her heart. Then she thought about how satisfying it would be to watch his face when he realized who he'd really been dealing with. He thinks I'm too stupid to be dangerous, she said quietly. Let's show him just how wrong he is. Andrew Campbell smiled for the first time since entering the room. "That's my girl. Now let's go plan a wedding that Matthew Reed will never forget." The processional music began, and Victoria Campbell took her father's arm for what would be the most important performance of her life. The St. Patrick's Cathedral was filled with Miami's elite. 300 guests who had come to witness what they believed would be a fairy tale wedding. Victoria's dress, a custom Vera Wang creation worth more than most people's cars, whispered against the marble floor as she moved down the aisle. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. She was no longer the heartbroken bride who had discovered her fiancé's betrayal an hour ago. She was now a woman on a mission. Matthew stood at the altar in his perfect tuxedo, his dark hair styled to perfection, his smile radiating what appeared to be pure joy and love. To everyone watching, he looked like a man about to marry the love of his life. Only Victoria could see the calculation behind his eyes as he watched her approach, dollar signs disguised as devotion. Father Martinez, who had known the Campbell family for decades, beamed as he prepared to perform the ceremony. The irony wasn't lost on Victoria that she was about to promise before God and witnesses to love and honor a man she now planned to systematically destroy. As she reached the altar, Matthew took her hands in his, and for just a moment, muscle memory made her want to believe this was real. His touch had once made her feel safe, cherished, complete. Now it felt like being touched by a snake. "You look absolutely breathtaking," Matthew whispered, and his voice carried just the right note of awe and love to make the nearby guests smile knowingly. "I'm the luckiest man alive." Victoria forced herself to smile back, letting tears gather in her eyes, tears that everyone would interpret as joy, but were actually fury held in perfect check. "I love you so much," she whispered back, and even she was impressed by how genuine she sounded. Father Martinez began the ceremony, his voice warm and familiar. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Victoria Elizabeth Campbell and Matthew James Reed in holy matrimony." As the familiar words washed over her, Victoria let her mind drift to the planning session she'd just had with her father. By the time she and Matthew returned from their European honeymoon, Andrew Campbell would have assembled a team of the best investigators and forensic accountants in the country. Every move Matthew made would be documented, every illegal transfer traced, every betrayal catalogued. "Do you, Matthew James Reed, take Victoria Elizabeth Campbell to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" Matthew's "I do" rang through the cathedral with Oscar-worthy conviction. Victoria watched his face as he spoke the words, seeing the triumph he was trying to hide. He thought he was seconds away from legal access to her fortune. "Do you, Victoria Elizabeth Campbell, take Matthew James Reed to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" For a split second, Victoria hesitated. Once she said those words, there would be no going back. She would be legally bound to a man who had spent 2 years systematically deceiving her, a man who thought her love was worthless and her trust was stupidity. But then she remembered his voice saying she was too soft, too trusting, too stupid to ever be dangerous. She thought about every woman who had ever been underestimated by a man who mistook kindness for weakness. "I do," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. As Matthew slipped the ring onto her finger, a 4-carat diamond that he'd chosen not for its beauty, but for its resale value, Victoria made him a silent promise that had nothing to do with their wedding vows. "I will love you exactly as much as you've loved me," she thought. "I will honor you exactly as much as you've honored me, and I will stay with you until death do us part, the death of every lie you've told and every scheme you've planned." "You may kiss the bride," Father Martinez announced. As Matthew's lips met hers, Victoria closed her eyes and let him kiss her with the passion of a man who thought he'd just won the lottery. The guests erupted in applause, rice and rose petals filled the air, and flash photography captured what would appear to be one of the happiest moments of their lives. But only Victoria knew the truth. This wasn't the beginning of their marriage. It was the beginning of Matthew Reed's very carefully orchestrated downfall. The game had begun, and he didn't even know he was already losing. The Ritz Paris had always been Victoria's favorite hotel in the world, But as she stood on the balcony of their penthouse suite overlooking Place Vendôme, even the City of Lights couldn't lift the weight of deception that had settled over her life. 3 days into their honeymoon, and Matthew's performance as the devoted husband was so convincing that Victoria sometimes found herself forgetting the truth. "Darling, come look at this," Matthew called from the living area, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection. "I found the perfect restaurant for tonight, that little bistro you mentioned wanting to try." Victoria turned from the balcony, plastering on the smile that had become her constant companion. Matthew was lounging on the silk-upholstered sofa, his laptop open beside him, wearing the casual elegance that had first attracted her to him. In the golden afternoon light streaming through the suite's windows, he looked like the perfect husband planning a romantic evening. If only she couldn't see his phone screen from her angle, displaying a text conversation with someone labeled N, undoubtedly Nicole, his secretary and lover. "That sounds wonderful," Victoria replied, settling beside him and subtly angling herself to read more of his messages. "You always know exactly what I want." The irony of her words wasn't lost on either of them, though only Victoria was aware of the double meaning. Matthew's phone buzzed with another message from N. "Missing you terribly. Doctor says baby is doing well." "When will you tell her?" Victoria's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral as Matthew quickly closed the message and pulled her closer. "Sorry, just work stuff. You know how demanding clients can be, even on honeymoon." "Of course," Victoria murmured, nestling into his embrace while her mind raced. A baby. Nicole was pregnant with Matthew's child, and he was planning to string Victoria along until... when? When would he have taken enough of her family's money to disappear with his real family? That evening at Le Grand Véfour, as Matthew played the attentive husband over champagne and foie gras, Victoria excused herself to the ladies' room and quickly called her father on the secure phone he'd given her. "How's the happy bride?" Andrew's voice was carefully neutral, aware that their calls might be monitored. "Learning so much about my husband," Victoria replied using their agreed-upon code. "He's been sharing some fascinating business ideas with his colleagues back home." "I see. Are these ideas something our legal team should review?" "Definitely, particularly the ones involving offshore accounts and creative asset management." Andrew was quiet for a moment. "I'll have our team expedite their research." "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" Victoria glanced toward their table, where Matthew was checking his phone again, probably reading more messages from Nicole. "I'm discovering I'm much stronger than I thought, Daddy." When she returned to the table, Matthew was back to playing the perfect husband, regaling her with stories about his day exploring the Louvre while she'd been shopping on the Champs-Élysées. What he didn't know was that Victoria had spent the day at the American Embassy, meeting with legal attachés about international financial crimes. "I have a surprise for you," Matthew said as their dessert arrived, producing an elegant document folder. "I know we talked about this before the wedding, but I thought it would be romantic to make it official here in Paris." Victoria's pulse quickened as she recognized the power of attorney documents that would give Matthew access to her accounts during their extended honeymoon. This was the moment he'd been building toward, the legal key to her family's fortune. "Oh, Matthew," she breathed, letting wonder and love fill her voice. "You want to handle our finances together? That's so mature, so trusting." Matthew's smile was warm and seemingly sincere. "I want us to be true partners in everything, Victoria. Your father built an incredible empire, and I want to help you expand it, invest it, make it grow for our future family." Future family. The words were like acid in Victoria's throat, knowing that he was already building a family with another woman. But she forced herself to look touched, even letting her eyes well up with tears. "This means everything to me," she whispered, reaching for the pen. "The fact that you want to share this responsibility." As she signed the documents that would give Matthew temporary control over millions of dollars, Victoria felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Every signature was another nail in his coffin, another piece of evidence for the case that was building against him. Matthew lifted his champagne glass in a toast. "To us, Mrs. Reed." "To our future." "To our future," Victoria echoed, clinking her glass against his. But as she sipped the champagne, she was thinking about a very different future than the one Matthew imagined, one where he would discover that Victoria Campbell Reed was nobody's victim, and the price of underestimating her was higher than he could possibly calculate. The game was accelerating now, and Matthew still had no idea he was the prey. Victoria's mornings in Paris had developed a routine that Matthew found endearing, but which served a far more sinister purpose. Every day, while he showered and prepared for what he believed were romantic sightseeing adventures, she methodically photographed documents, recorded conversations, and built the case that would destroy him. "I'm just going to grab us some coffee from that cafe downstairs," she called through the bathroom door, hearing the shower running. "I know how you like your morning caffeine fix." "You're an angel," Matthew's voice echoed from the marble bathroom. "Get me one of those chocolate croissants too. I'll be ready in 15 minutes. 15 minutes was all Victoria needed. The moment she heard the bathroom door close, she was at Matthew's laptop, the password-cracking device her father's security team had given her, already plugged into the USB port. Within minutes, she was downloading files from his computer, copying emails, and accessing cloud storage accounts he thought were secure. The evidence was staggering. Email chains with Nicole that revealed not just their affair, but detailed plans for what Matthew called their exit strategy. Financial projections, showing how much money he planned to transfer before filing for divorce. Even a document titled Victoria Management that outlined psychological manipulation techniques he'd been using to keep her compliant. Victoria's hands trembled as she read his clinical assessment of her personality. Subject responds well to validation and romantic gestures. Insecurity about past relationships makes her grateful for attention. Father issues create strong need for male approval. Recommend continued use of vulnerability displays to maintain emotional control. She was listed like a mark in a con game, her deepest emotional wounds catalogued as weaknesses to exploit. But the most damaging evidence was in his financial records. Matthew had been systematically overcharging clients, padding expenses and skimming from settlements, all crimes that would result in disbarment and potential prosecution. He'd been using Victoria's name and family connections to gain client trust, then stealing from those very clients. Her phone buzzed with a message from her father. "Secured line. Status report." Victoria quickly typed back, "Evidence exceeds expectations. Financial fraud, client theft, systematic embezzlement, more than enough for complete destruction." "Timeline?" Victoria glanced toward the bathroom, hearing Matthew humming in the shower. "Subject planning major transfers next week. Suggest we move to containment phase." "Agreed. Initiate return protocol." 20 minutes later, Victoria was back in the suite with coffee and pastries, playing the devoted wife, as Matthew emerged from the bathroom looking refreshed and handsome. He kissed her cheek with what seemed like genuine affection, and for a moment Victoria marveled at how convincing his performance was. "I have an idea," she said, settling into his arms on the sofa. "I know we plan to stay another 2 weeks, but I'm getting a little homesick. Would you think I was terrible if I wanted to go back to Miami a bit early?" Matthew's eyes flickered with something she now recognized as calculation, though his expression remained loving. "Whatever makes you happy, darling, though I thought you were enjoying Paris." "I am, but—" Victoria let her voice take on a slightly vulnerable tone. "I keep thinking about our life together back home. Our apartment, starting our real married life. Plus I miss Daddy and I know he's dying to hear all about our honeymoon." "Of course," Matthew said warmly, though Victoria could practically see the wheels turning in his head. Getting back to Miami early would give him more time to implement his financial plans before Victoria might grow suspicious. "Let me see about changing our flights." As Matthew made calls to adjust their travel arrangements, Victoria stepped onto the balcony and sent a coded message to her father. "Returning home in 48 hours. Phase 2 ready to commence." The response came quickly. "Team assembled. The prey is walking into the trap." That afternoon, as they strolled through the gardens of the Palace of Versailles, Matthew was more attentive than ever, seemingly thrilled by the prospect of returning home early. He held her hand, pointed out architectural details, and played the role of loving husband with Academy Award-worthy skill. "I can't wait to start our real life together," he said, pulling her close as they stood before the famous Hall of Mirrors. "I have so many plans for us, Victoria, so many dreams I want to make come true." Victoria smiled back at him, seeing their reflection multiplied endlessly in the antique mirrors. "I can't wait to see what surprises you have in store for me." "Trust me," Matthew said, his smile confident and self-satisfied. You won't see any of it coming. He was absolutely right about that, though not in the way he imagined. As they walked back through the palace gardens, Victoria was already envisioning the look on his face when he realized that the biggest surprise of all would be discovering who had really been playing whom in their marriage of deception. The endgame was approaching, and Matthew Reed was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life: never underestimate a Campbell woman. The Campbell family mansion in Coral Gables had never looked more beautiful than it did on the evening Victoria and Matthew returned from Paris. Andrew Campbell had spared no expense in creating the perfect setting for what he privately called the final act, a welcome home dinner party that would serve as the launching pad for their carefully orchestrated plan. "Darling, your father really outdid himself," Matthew said, as their car pulled through the gates of the sprawling estate. The mansion was lit up like a palace, with elegant lighting illuminating the Spanish Revival architecture and the manicured gardens. "I feel like we're arriving at a royal reception." Victoria squeezed his hand, playing her role perfectly. "Daddy wanted to celebrate our marriage properly. You know how important family is to him, and now your family too." The words tasted like poison in her mouth, but Matthew's pleased smile made the performance worthwhile. He still had no idea that every person at tonight's party was part of an elaborate trap designed specifically for him. Inside, 50 of Miami's most influential business leaders mingled in the mansion's grand ballroom, champagne glasses reflecting the light from the crystal chandeliers. To Matthew, this looked like the perfect opportunity to expand his network and gain access to even more potential victims. To Victoria, it was a carefully curated collection of witnesses for what was about to unfold. "Matthew, welcome to the family," Andrew Campbell's voice boomed as he approached, with two men Matthew didn't recognize. "I'd like you to meet some associates of mine. This is Robert Sterling from Sterling & Associates and David Chen from Chen Financial Management." Matthew's practiced charm immediately kicked in as he shook hands with both men, not realizing that Robert Sterling was one of Miami's most prominent criminal defense attorneys, and David Chen specialized in forensic accounting for white-collar crime investigations. "It's a pleasure to meet you both," Matthew said smoothly. "I understand you work in financial services, Mr. Chen?" "That's fascinating. I've been handling some investment strategies for Victoria's portfolio that might interest you." Victoria watched David Chen's expression remain perfectly neutral, even as Matthew essentially confessed to unauthorized financial activities within earshot of a forensic accountant. Her husband was so confident in his own cleverness that he couldn't see the trap closing around him. "I'd love to hear more about your strategies," David replied blandly. "Perhaps we could discuss them in detail sometime soon." As the evening progressed, Victoria watched Matthew work the room like the skilled manipulator he was, dropping hints about investment opportunities, mentioning his access to Campbell Industries resources, and painting himself as a financial genius who had turned his wife's inheritance into a gold mine. "The key," he told a group of potential investors, unaware that two of them were undercover investigators, "is knowing how to move assets quickly and efficiently. International markets, offshore opportunities, most people are too conservative to maximize their potential." Victoria excused herself from a conversation about charity work and found her father on the mansion's terrace, where he was speaking quietly with Robert Sterling. "How's our guest of honor performing?" Andrew asked as Victoria joined them. "Like a master class in self-incrimination," Victoria replied. "He's been describing his financial strategies to half the room, including what sound like clear violations of fiduciary duty." Robert Sterling nodded grimly. "We're recording everything, of course. By the end of tonight, we'll have enough evidence to file formal complaints with the Florida Bar, the SEC, and potentially the FBI. Speaking of which," Andrew said, checking his watch, "it's almost time for the main event." As if on cue, a server approached with a silver tray bearing an urgent-looking envelope addressed to Matthew. Victoria watched from across the room as he opened it, his face shifting from curiosity to concern to barely concealed panic as he read the contents. The letter, crafted by Andrew's legal team, informed Matthew that irregularities had been discovered in several client accounts and that an emergency audit would begin the following Monday. It was carefully worded to sound like a routine compliance issue, but Matthew's guilty conscience would read it as the beginning of the end. Victoria approached him with a concerned expression. "Darling, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." It's nothing, Matthew said quickly, stuffing the letter into his jacket pocket. Just some bureaucratic nonsense at the firm. Nothing to worry about. But Victoria could see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning, could see the way his hands shook slightly as he reached for his champagne glass. The pressure was beginning to crack his perfect facade. "Maybe we should go home," she suggested gently. "You look tired from all the travel." "Yes," Matthew agreed, perhaps too quickly. "Yes, I think that's a good idea. Early day tomorrow." As they made their goodbyes, Victoria noticed Matthew's behavior becoming increasingly erratic. He rushed through conversations, seemed distracted and jumpy, and kept checking his phone obsessively. During the car ride to their penthouse apartment in South Beach, Victoria reached over and took his hand. "Are you sure everything's okay? You seem worried about something." Matthew forced a smile and lifted their joined hands to kiss her fingers. "Just tired, my love. Tomorrow everything will be back to normal." Victoria smiled back at him, thinking about how wrong he was. Tomorrow, nothing would ever be normal for Matthew Reed again. The trap was set, the evidence was gathered, and the noose was tightening. "I love you," she said softly, the words carrying a meaning he would never understand. "I love you too," he replied, and for the first time since she'd discovered his betrayal, Victoria thought she heard a note of genuine emotion in his voice. Too little, too late, she thought as they pulled into their building's parking garage. Far too late. Monday morning arrived grey and humid, typical for Miami in late summer, but Victoria woke with a sense of electric anticipation. Today, the careful house of cards that Matthew had built over 2 years would begin to collapse, and she would be there to watch every moment. Matthew had been restless all weekend, checking his phone constantly and making hushed phone calls that he claimed were work-related. Victoria had played the concerned wife perfectly, bringing him coffee during his urgent business calls and never asking too many questions. "I have to go in early today," Matthew announced over breakfast, his usual confidence replaced by barely controlled anxiety. "Some client issues that need immediate attention." Victoria looked up from her yogurt and berries, letting concern color her expression. "On a Monday morning, that sounds serious. Is there anything I can do to help?" No, it's just routine stuff," Matthew said, but his hands were shaking slightly as he adjusted his tie. "Might be a long day, though. Don't wait up for me if I'm late." "Of course, darling." Victoria rose from her chair and straightened his tie with wifely devotion. "Just promise me you won't work too hard. We just got back from our honeymoon. I want my husband healthy and happy." The kiss he gave her goodbye felt desperate, though Victoria doubted he realized it. As soon as she heard the elevator doors close, she was on the phone with her father. "He just left," she reported. "How long before the first shoe drops?" "Robert's team is already in motion," Andrew replied. "The Florida bar received our complaint packet at 8 a.m. SEC investigators will be at his office by 10. We've given Matthew just enough rope to hang himself." By 9:30 a.m., Victoria was positioned at a coffee shop across the street from Matthew's law firm, wearing sunglasses and a casual outfit that made her nearly invisible among the morning crowd. She wanted to see his face when his world began to crumble. At exactly 10:15, 3 black SUVs pulled up to the building. Victoria watched through the window as serious-looking men and women in business suits entered the lobby. SEC investigators, just as her father had promised. Her phone buzzed with a text from Matthew. "Something's come up at the office. Might be very late tonight. Love you." Victoria typed back, "Take all the time you need, darling. I'll be here when you get home." But she wasn't going home. For the next 6 hours, Victoria maintained her surveillance from various positions around the downtown area, watching as Matthew's life imploded in real time. She saw him leave the building at 2 p.m. looking disheveled and panicked, saw him make frantic phone calls from his car, saw him drive to 3 different banks, probably trying to move money before accounts could be frozen. At 4 p.m., her phone rang. Matthew's name appeared on the screen, and Victoria composed herself before answering. "Hi, honey, how's your day going?" Matthew's voice was strained, though he was clearly trying to sound normal. "It's been challenging. Listen, Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to trust me." "Of course, what is it?" "I need you to sign some papers, financial documents. There's been a misunderstanding with some of my client accounts, and I need to move some of our assets temporarily to protect them." Victoria's grip tightened on the phone. This was it, the moment when Matthew's desperation would lead him to commit the final crime that would seal his fate. "That sounds serious," she said, injecting just the right note of concern and confusion. "What kind of misunderstanding?" "Nothing major, just bureaucratic nonsense. But I need to act quickly. Can you meet me at the apartment?" "I'll explain everything when I get there." "I'm already here," Victoria lied smoothly. "I came home early because I was worried about you. You sounded so stressed this morning." "You're perfect," Matthew said, and for once his voice carried genuine emotion. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Victoria ended the call and immediately phoned her father. "He's making his move. Whatever documents he's bringing, they're his attempt to steal everything before the investigation closes in." "Are you ready for this?" Andrew asked quietly. Victoria thought about the past week of playing the devoted wife to a man who had never loved her, thought about the months of planning and preparation that had led to this moment. Most of all, she thought about Matthew's voice saying she was too stupid to be dangerous. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." As Victoria drove toward their apartment building, she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The performance was almost over. Soon, Matthew Reed would discover that he had made the most expensive mistake of his life when he chose to underestimate Victoria Campbell. The final act was about to begin. Victoria arrived at their South Beach penthouse 30 minutes before Matthew, giving her time to prepare for what would be the most crucial performance of her elaborate deception. She changed into a flowing sundress that made her look younger, more innocent, and positioned herself in the living room with a book, the picture of domestic tranquility. When Matthew's key turned in the lock, Victoria could hear the desperation in his movements, the hurried footsteps, the way he dropped his briefcase too hard, the sharp intake of breath when he saw her curled on the sofa. "Victoria, thank God you're here," he said, crossing to her with urgent strides. Up close, she could see the sweat stains on his shirt, despite the office building's air conditioning, the way his usually perfect hair was disheveled from running his hands through it. "Darling, you look terrible," Victoria said, rising to meet him with concern written across her features. "What's happening? You've been so strange since we got back from Paris." Matthew took her hands in his, and Victoria was struck by how cold and clammy his palms were. "I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" "Of course. You're my husband. I trust you with my life." The irony of her words wasn't lost on either of them, though only Victoria was aware of the deeper meaning. Matthew pulled out a folder of documents that Victoria immediately recognized as transfer authorizations, papers that would move substantial assets from Campbell family accounts into accounts controlled solely by Matthew. "There's been a problem at my firm," Matthew began, his voice taking on the smooth, persuasive tone he'd used to manipulate her for 2 years. "Some accusations about improper handling of client funds. It's all nonsense, of course, but during the investigation they might freeze our accounts." Victoria let her eyes widen with alarm. "Freeze our accounts? But that's our money. They can't do that, can they?" "They can, temporarily. That's why I need to move our assets to a secure location until this all blows over. These papers will transfer everything to a protected trust account that can't be touched by the investigators." Victoria took the documents with trembling hands, scanning the legal language with apparent confusion. In reality, she was noting every detail, every account number, every signature line that would serve as evidence of attempted grand theft. "This is so complicated," she said, letting helplessness creep into her voice. "I don't understand all this legal language. Maybe I should call Daddy's lawyers to review it." Matthew's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the panic underneath. No, Victoria, there isn't time. If we don't move these assets today, we could lose everything. The investigation could seize accounts as early as tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" Victoria's voice rose with manufactured anxiety. "Matthew, you're scaring me. How much trouble are you in?" "I'm not in any trouble," Matthew insisted, though his voice was getting more desperate. "This is just a precaution, a way to protect what we've built together." Victoria stared at the papers, then at Matthew's face, letting the silence stretch until he began to fidget. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. "If you think this is what's best, I mean, you understand these things better than I do." Matthew's relief was palpable. "You're incredible, Victoria. I knew I could count on you. This is exactly why I fell in love with you. Your trust your faith in me. As Victoria signed the documents that would attempt to steal millions from her family, she thought about how those words would sound when played back in a courtroom. Every signature was another felony count, every document another nail in Matthew's legal coffin. "There," she said, handing the completed papers back to him. "I hope this protects us. I'm so scared, Matthew. What if they come after us personally?" Matthew pulled her into his arms, and Victoria forced herself not to recoil from his touch. "Nothing is going to happen to us, I promise. In a few weeks this will all be resolved and we'll be stronger than ever." As he held her, Victoria could feel his phone buzzing incessantly in his pocket. Probably Nicole, she thought, wondering where he was and when he was coming home to his real family. "I have to go back to the office," Matthew said, releasing her. "There are some things I need to handle before tomorrow, but Victoria, if anyone calls asking about these transfers, you don't know anything about them, okay? As far as you know, I handle all our financial matters." "Of course," Victoria agreed readily. "I've never been good with money anyway. That's why I married such a smart, capable man." Matthew's smile was warm and seemingly genuine as he kissed her goodbye. "I love you more than you know, Victoria Campbell Reed." Victoria watched from the window as Matthew's car disappeared into Miami traffic, carrying the documents that would destroy his life. Only then did she allow herself to smile, a cold, satisfied expression that would have terrified Matthew if he'd seen it. She picked up her phone and dialed her father's number. "It's done," she said simply. "He just committed multiple felonies in our living room and I have it all on video. The accounts he's trying to access were emptied and frozen an hour ago. Every dollar he thinks he's stealing is actually flowing into a monitored account that will serve as evidence." Andrew Campbell's voice carried deep satisfaction. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" Victoria thought about the question, examining her emotions carefully. She felt no guilt, no remorse, no sadness. What she felt was a profound sense of justice being served. "I feel like myself again," she said finally. "For the first time in 2 years, I feel like myself." Tomorrow, Matthew Reed would wake up to discover that his carefully constructed house of lies had collapsed completely. And Victoria Campbell Reed would be there to watch every beautiful moment of his downfall. Victoria woke the next morning to the sound of Matthew's phone ringing incessantly from the guest bedroom, where he'd spent the night claiming he didn't want to disturb her after his stressful day. She'd played the understanding wife perfectly, bringing him warm milk and expressing sympathy for his work troubles. Now, listening to the panic in his voice as he answered call after call, Victoria felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The reckoning had begun. "What do you mean the accounts are frozen?" Matthew's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "That's impossible. I just made those transfers yesterday." Victoria silently dressed in a casual outfit and prepared coffee, playing the role of the oblivious wife starting her normal morning routine. Through the guest room door, she could hear Matthew's increasingly frantic conversations. "Nicole, I can't talk right now. No, I don't know when this will be resolved. Just give me some time to figure this out." At 8:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. Victoria opened the door to find 2 FBI agents and a Miami-Dade detective, their badges gleaming in the morning sunlight. "Mrs. Reed, I'm Agent Sarah Martinez with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant to search these premises and would like to speak with your husband." Victoria's performance was flawless, the shocked wife confused and frightened by the sudden appearance of law enforcement. "FBI? I don't understand. What's this about?" "Your husband is under investigation for embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering," Agent Martinez explained gently. "Is he here?" He's in the guest room," Victoria stammered, allowing her voice to shake convincingly. "He's been so stressed about work lately. Is he in serious trouble?" Before Agent Martinez could answer, Matthew appeared in the hallway, his hair disheveled and his face pale with shock. He'd clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand that his worst nightmare was unfolding. "There must be some mistake," Matthew said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I'm Matthew Reed, attorney at Reed & Associates. Whatever you think I've done." "Mr. Reed, you're under arrest for multiple counts of embezzlement, wire fraud, and attempted grand theft," Detective Torres announced, producing handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Victoria watched the color drain from Matthew's face as the Miranda rights were read. His eyes met hers across the room and she saw the exact moment when realization began to dawn. the moment when he started to understand that his perfect victim might not have been so perfect after all. "Victoria," he called out as the handcuffs clicked into place. "Call Robert Sterling, tell him what's happening, he'll know what to do." Victoria nodded mutely, playing the panicked wife even as she thought about how Robert Sterling was actually her father's attorney and had helped orchestrate this entire operation. As the officers led Matthew away, Agent Martinez turned to Victoria with professional sympathy. "Mrs. Reed, I know this is overwhelming, but we'll need to speak with you about your knowledge of your husband's financial activities." "I don't know anything about his business," Victoria said, letting tears flow freely now. "He always said I was too trusting to understand complicated financial matters. He handled everything." Agent Martinez's expression softened. "That's actually very common in these cases. Many spouses are kept deliberately uninformed to protect them from legal liability. We believe you're a victim here too, Mrs. Reed." "A victim?" Victoria almost smiled at the irony. She was many things, but she was certainly not a victim. Over the next 3 hours, Victoria gave a performance worthy of an Academy Award, playing the devastated wife who had slowly discovered her husband's betrayal. She provided investigators with access to financial records, expressed shock at evidence of his affair with Nicole, and painted herself as an isolated, naive woman who had been systematically manipulated. "He always said I was lucky to have someone who could handle the complicated business side of our marriage," she told Agent Martinez, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I trusted him completely. I signed whatever he put in front of me." Every word was carefully calculated to reinforce her image as an innocent victim while simultaneously providing evidence of Matthew's guilt. The investigators bought the performance completely, seeing exactly what Victoria wanted them to see: a sheltered rich girl who had been expertly manipulated by a skilled con artist. At 2 p.m., Victoria's phone rang. It was a collect call from the Miami-Dade County Jail. "Victoria, thank God." Matthew's voice was hoarse with desperation. "Listen to me very carefully. Get Robert Sterling on the phone right now. Tell him to liquidate the emergency accounts. He'll know which ones. Use that money to post my bail and hire the best criminal defense team in Florida." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until Matthew began to panic. "Victoria, are you there? Did you hear what I said?" "I heard you," Victoria replied quietly. "I heard every word." Something in her tone must have alerted him, because Matthew's voice changed, becoming suspicious. "What's wrong? You sound different." Victoria walked to the window of their penthouse apartment, looking out over the Miami skyline that sparkled in the afternoon sun. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, controlled, and utterly cold. "I sound different because I am different, Matthew. I'm not the stupid, trusting little girl you married yesterday. I'm the woman who's been planning your destruction for weeks." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "You see, darling," Victoria continued, "I heard your conversation with Jake and Stephen on our wedding day. I heard every word about how pathetic I am, how disgusting you find me, how you've been planning to steal my family's money and abandon me for your pregnant girlfriend." Matthew's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. "Did you really think," Victoria asked quietly, "that a woman smart enough to inherit a business empire would be too stupid to recognize when she was being played?" When Matthew finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "How long have you known?" "Since 30 minutes before I walked down the aisle to marry you. Every day since then has been me playing the role you wanted me to play, while I built the case that's going to destroy your life." "Victoria, please." "No," Victoria interrupted firmly. "You had your turn to speak. For 2 years you've been talking, lying, manipulating and stealing. Now it's my turn." The phone line crackled with static as Victoria prepared to deliver the final blow. "There is no Robert Sterling coming to save you. There are no emergency accounts to liquidate. There is no bail money, no legal defense fund, and no naive little wife to rescue you from the consequences of your actions." Matthew's voice broke as he spoke. "What are you going to do?" Victoria smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I'm going to watch you pay for every lie you told, every dollar you stole, and every moment you made me believe I was loved, when I was just being used." "Victoria, Goodbye, Matthew. I hope prison gives you plenty of time to think about what happens when you underestimate a Campbell woman." Victoria hung up the phone and immediately blocked Matthew's number. Then she called her father. "It's over," she said simply. "How do you feel?" Victoria considered the question carefully. She felt cleansed, vindicated, and finally free from the prison of lies that had surrounded her for 2 years. "I feel like I can breathe again," she said finally. "For the first time since our wedding day, I feel like I can finally breathe." 6 months later, Victoria sat in the gallery of the Miami-Dade County Courthouse, wearing a simple black dress that conveyed both dignity and mourning for the marriage that had never really existed. The trial of the state of Florida versus Matthew James Reed had become the most talked-about white-collar crime case in Miami's recent history. Matthew sat at the defendant's table, looking haggard and defeated, a far cry from the confident, charming man who had swept Victoria off her feet 2 years earlier. His court-appointed attorney, the best criminal defense he could afford after all his assets had been frozen, looked overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence against his client. "Your Honor," Assistant District Attorney Linda Vasquez addressed the judge, "the evidence will show that Mr. Reed engaged in a systematic pattern of fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft spanning over 2 years. He manipulated his way into marriage with the victim specifically to gain access to her family's financial resources." Victoria listened as the prosecutor laid out the case with clinical precision. Every recorded conversation, every forged document, every illegal transfer was presented with devastating clarity. The jury, 8 women and 4 men, looked increasingly disturbed as the scope of Matthew's deception became clear. When Victoria was called to testify, she walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity, aware that this moment would define not just Matthew's fate, but her own future. She had spent months preparing for this testimony, crafting her responses to paint herself as the victim she legally was, while avoiding any hint of the elaborate revenge plot she had orchestrated. "Mrs. Reed," Ada Vasquez began gently, "can you tell the jury how you first became aware of your husband's deception?" Victoria's voice was steady and clear as she recounted the story she had perfected. Discovering suspicious financial documents after their return from Paris, gradually uncovering evidence of Matthew's affair and financial crimes, and finally realizing the full scope of his betrayal. "I felt so stupid," Victoria said, allowing real emotion to color her voice. "For 2 years I believed he loved me. I trusted him with everything. My heart, my family's business relationships, our financial future. Finding out it was all a lie, it was devastating." Matthew's attorney, a tired-looking man named David Hoffman, tried during cross-examination to suggest that Victoria had been aware of and complicit in her husband's activities. "Mrs. Reed, isn't it true that you signed numerous financial documents without reading them carefully?" "Yes," Victoria admitted readily. "My husband told me he was handling our investments and protecting our assets. I trusted my husband completely." "And you never questioned his business practices?" "I'm not a lawyer or a financial expert, Mr. Hoffman. My husband convinced me that I was too unsophisticated to understand complicated business matters." I believed him. The jury clearly sympathized with Victoria's testimony. Several of the women looked angry on her behalf, while the men appeared disgusted by Matthew's manipulation of his wife's trust. When it came time for Matthew to testify in his own defense, Victoria watched with fascination as he attempted to portray himself as a victim of circumstances, claiming that business pressures and mounting debts had driven him to make poor decisions. "I never intended to hurt Victoria," Matthew said, his voice thick with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "I loved her, and I thought I could fix everything before she ever had to know about my problems." But under cross-examination, Ada Vasquez systematically destroyed Matthew's claims of love and good intentions, playing recordings of his conversations with Jake and Stephen, where he described Victoria as pathetic and disgusting. "Mr. Reed," the prosecutor asked coldly, "does this sound like the voice of a man who loves his wife?" As Matthew's own words filled the courtroom, his cruel laughter, his casual dismissal of Victoria's feelings, his gleeful planning of her financial destruction, Victoria watched the jury's faces harden with disgust. The closing arguments were devastating. Ada Vasquez painted Matthew as a calculating predator who had deliberately targeted a vulnerable woman for financial gain, while defense attorney Hoffman could only plead for leniency based on Matthew's previously clean record and claims of remorse. When the jury retired to deliberate, Victoria felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Whatever the verdict, she had already won the most important victory. She had reclaimed her power, her dignity, and her sense of self-worth. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Patricia Morrison asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied. "On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of grand theft, we find the defendant guilty." As the guilty verdicts continued, 12 counts in total, Victoria watched Matthew's shoulders slump in defeat. When Judge Morrison announced that sentencing would take place in 2 weeks, Matthew finally turned to look at Victoria for the first time during the trial. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Victoria saw in his face not anger or hatred, but a profound sadness and what looked like genuine remorse. For just a moment she glimpsed the man she had fallen in love with, or thought she had fallen in love with, and felt a brief flicker of the old pain. But then she remembered his voice calling her pathetic, remembered his laughter as he planned her destruction, and the moment of weakness passed. Matthew Reed had made his choices. Now he would live with the consequences. As Victoria left the courthouse that day, she felt the weight of 2 years of deception finally lifting from her shoulders. The trial was over, justice had been served, and she was finally free to begin rebuilding her life. The little girl who had walked down the aisle believing in fairy tales was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who understood that the most powerful weapon against betrayal was not revenge, but the truth served with absolute precision. And Victoria Campbell Reed had served the truth like a master chef serving a perfectly prepared meal, with elegance, timing, and devastating effectiveness. 2 weeks later, Victoria returned to the Miami-Dade County Courthouse for Matthew's sentencing hearing. This time she wasn't alone. Her father, Andrew Campbell, sat beside her in the gallery, offering silent support as they prepared to witness the final chapter of Matthew Reed's downfall. Judge Patricia Morrison had a reputation for tough sentencing in white-collar crime cases, and her expression was stern as she reviewed the pre-sentencing report. Matthew stood before her in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled, looking nothing like the confident lawyer who had once charmed Miami's social elite. "Mr. Reed," Judge Morrison began, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, "in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case involving such calculated and heartless manipulation. You didn't just steal money. You stole 2 years of a young woman's life, exploited her trust, and planned to abandon her once you had taken everything you could." Matthew's court-appointed attorney had filed a motion for leniency, citing his client's previously clean record and claims of mental health issues stemming from financial pressure. But Victoria had spent months working with the prosecution to ensure that the full scope of Matthew's crimes was understood. "Your Honor," ADA Linda Vasquez addressed the court, "the defendant's crimes weren't committed in a moment of desperation. They were part of a sophisticated, long-term plan to defraud not just Mrs. Reed, but multiple clients who trusted him with their legal and financial affairs. The evidence shows that Mr. Reed stole over $800,000 from client accounts, forged documents, and used his position as an attorney to commit these crimes." Victoria had requested permission to read a victim impact statement, something she had agonized over for weeks. When Judge Morrison called her name, she walked to the podium with quiet dignity, carrying a letter that represented far more than just words on paper. "Your Honor," Victoria began, her voice clear and strong, "Matthew Reed didn't just steal money from me. He stole my ability to trust, my faith in love, and my belief that I was worthy of genuine affection. For 2 years, he made me question my own intelligence, my own worth, and my own judgment." Victoria glanced at Matthew, who was listening with his head bowed. "He convinced me that I was lucky to have someone who could tolerate my flaws, that I should be grateful for his attention. He used my love as a weapon against me, and he did it with such skill that I nearly lost myself in the process." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "But I want this court to know that while Matthew Reed took many things from me, he ultimately gave me something valuable too. He taught me that I am stronger than I ever imagined, more resilient than I knew, and far more capable than he ever believed." Victoria looked directly at Matthew now, her green eyes steady and unflinching. "I have no hatred left for you, Matthew. Hatred would give you power over me, and I will never give you that again. Instead, I pity you, because you had something real and beautiful, and you threw it away for money. As Victoria returned to her seat, she saw tears streaming down Matthew's face. For the first time since their wedding day, his emotion appeared genuine. Defense attorney Hoffman made a brief plea for leniency, emphasizing Matthew's remorse and his willingness to make restitution. But Judge Morrison's expression remained unmoved. "Mr. Reed," the judge said finally, "you are a lawyer who used your legal knowledge to commit sophisticated crimes. You betrayed not just your wife but your profession and every client who trusted you. Your actions strike at the very heart of our legal system's integrity." Judge Morrison paused, consulting her notes. "Taking into account the severity and duration of your crimes, your abuse of your position as an attorney, and the devastating impact on your victims, I hereby sentence you to 12 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation." Matthew's legs buckled slightly at the sentence, and his attorney reached out to steady him. 12 years. Victoria felt a complex mix of emotions: satisfaction at seeing justice served, sadness for the waste of a life, and relief that this chapter was finally closing. "Additionally," Judge Morrison continued, "you are hereby disbarred from practicing law in the state of Florida, and you are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims in the amount of $847,000. As the bailiff led Matthew away, he turned one last time to look at Victoria. Their eyes met, and Victoria saw in his face a profound regret that seemed to go far deeper than simple remorse for being caught. "I'm sorry," he mouthed silently, and for the first time since discovering his betrayal, Victoria believed he meant it. But some apologies come too late, and some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness to bridge the gap. Victoria nodded once in acknowledgement, not of forgiveness but of closure, and then watched as Matthew Reed disappeared from her life forever. As they left the courthouse, Andrew Campbell put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" Victoria thought about the question as they walked into the bright Miami sunshine. The 2-year nightmare was finally over. The man who had manipulated and betrayed her was facing the consequences of his actions, and she was free to begin rebuilding her life on her own terms. "I feel like myself again," she said finally. "For the first time in 2 years, I feel completely like myself." That evening, Victoria stood on the balcony of her father's Coral Gables mansion, looking out over Biscayne Bay as the sun set over Miami. Tomorrow she would begin the process of officially resuming her maiden name. She would return to work at Campbell Industries, throwing herself into the business that had been her true calling, before Matthew had convinced her that she wasn't smart enough for the corporate world. Most importantly, she would begin the process of learning to trust again, not just others but herself. The naive girl who had walked down the aisle believing in fairy tale endings was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who understood that real strength came not from avoiding betrayal, but from surviving it with grace and dignity intact. Victoria Campbell had learned the hardest lesson of her life, that love without respect is worthless, that trust without verification is dangerous, and that underestimating a woman with intelligence, resources, and determination is the most expensive mistake a man can make. As the last light faded from the Miami sky, Victoria smiled. Her real life was just beginning. 1 year later, Victoria Campbell stood in the boardroom of Campbell Industries, addressing the board of directors with the same confidence and poise that had once attracted Matthew Reed. But this was a different woman than the one who had married him. Harder in some ways, yet more genuinely warm in others, tempered by adversity into someone truly formidable. "Our third-quarter profits are up 43%, Victoria announced, clicking to the next slide of her presentation. "The Miami Convention Center project is ahead of schedule and under budget, and we've secured preliminary approval for the Aventura waterfront development." Andrew Campbell watched his daughter with undisguised pride as she fielded questions from the board members with expertise and authority. In the year since Matthew's sentencing, Victoria had thrown herself into the family business with remarkable dedication, earning her MBA from the University of Miami's executive program while simultaneously overhauling several underperforming divisions of Campbell Industries. "Victoria," board member Margaret Chen asked, "what's your projection for next year's expansion into the Orlando market?" "Conservative estimates suggest we'll see a 20% return on investment within 18 months, Victoria replied confidently. The tourism industry recovery is exceeding all projections, and our hotel management division is perfectly positioned to capitalize on the upswing. After the meeting, Victoria walked with her father to his corner office, the same space where they had planned Matthew's downfall more than a year ago. The view of downtown Miami from the 42nd floor never failed to inspire her, a reminder of how far she had climbed from the devastated bride who had discovered her husband's betrayal. "I have something to tell you," Andrew said, as they settled into the comfortable chairs by his office window. "I've been approached by the Miami Business Journal. They want to do a cover story about your transformation of our company's performance." Victoria shook her head immediately. "No interviews, Daddy. We agreed. No publicity about Matthew or the trial. I want that chapter of my life to stay closed." "This wouldn't be about Matthew," Andrew assured her. "This would be about you, about the brilliant businesswoman who took a company that was performing adequately and turned it into one of the most profitable enterprises in South Florida." Victoria considered this, absently twisting the simple platinum band she now wore on her right hand, her mother's wedding ring, which she had reclaimed from storage as a symbol of real love and commitment. "Maybe," she said finally. "Let me think about it." That evening, Victoria was working late in her new penthouse apartment in Brickell, reviewing contracts for the Orlando expansion, when her assistant Elena knocked on her home office door. "Victoria, there's someone here to see you. She says it's about Matthew." Victoria's blood ran cold. She had deliberately avoided any contact with Matthew's world since the trial, wanting to move forward without looking back. "Who is it?" "Nicole Martinez." The name hit Victoria like a physical blow. Nicole, Matthew's secretary, his lover, the mother of his child. The woman he had really loved while pretending to love Victoria. "Should I tell her you're not available?" Eleanor asked, reading Victoria's expression correctly. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with emotions she thought she had put to rest. Then she straightened her shoulders in a gesture that had become habitual over the past year. "No, send her in." Nicole Martinez was smaller than Victoria had expected, with dark hair and tired eyes that spoke of someone who had been through her own ordeal. She was clearly nervous as she entered Victoria's home office, clutching a purse with white knuckles. "Mrs. Ms. Campbell, I'm sorry to bother you at home. I tried calling your office, but—" "It's fine," Victoria interrupted gently. "Please sit down. Can I get you something to drink?" Nicole shook her head, perching on the edge of the chair like she was ready to flee at any moment. "I won't take much of your time. I wanted to apologize and to thank you." Victoria blinked in surprise. "Thank me for not destroying my life along with his," Nicole said quietly. "I know you could have. You had evidence of our affair, evidence that I helped him with some of the financial transfers. You could have had me prosecuted too." Victoria studied the young woman before her, seeing not a rival, but another victim of Matthew's manipulation. "You were pregnant," she said simply, "and you were in love with him. Neither of those things made you a criminal." Nicole's eyes filled with tears. "I believed him when he said he was going to leave you anyway, that your marriage was just for convenience. I believed him when he said you didn't really love him. I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid," Victoria said firmly. "You were in love with a man who was very good at making people believe what he wanted them to believe. Trust me, I understand better than anyone." They sat in silence for a moment, two women who had both been casualties of Matthew Reed's selfishness and deception. "How is your son?" Victoria asked finally. Nicole's face lit up with the first genuine smile Victoria had seen from her. "Lucas is beautiful. He's walking now and he has Matthew's eyes, but none of his capacity for deception, I hope. I'm sure he'll be a good man," Victoria said. "You'll make sure of that." Nicole nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I wanted you to know. I never asked Matthew to contact me after his arrest. I wrote him one letter telling him about Lucas's birth, but I never responded when he wrote back. I don't want my son to know his father as the man who went to prison for stealing from his wife." Victoria felt an unexpected surge of respect for Nicole's strength. "You're protecting your child. That's what a good mother does." As Nicole prepared to leave, she turned back with one final question. Do you think Matthew really loved me? Or was I just as much of a mark as you were?" Victoria considered the question carefully. Based on the recordings she had heard, Matthew's feelings for Nicole had seemed genuine, or at least as genuine as Matthew was capable of feeling. But she also understood that Nicole needed to believe her love story had contained some truth, even if it had ended in devastation. "I think Matthew loved you as much as he was capable of loving anyone," Victoria said finally. "The problem was that he loved money and himself more than he loved either of us." After Nicole left, Victoria stood at her window looking out over the Miami skyline, processing the unexpected encounter. She felt no jealousy toward Nicole, no anger or resentment. Instead, she felt a profound sense of closure, as if the last loose thread from her past had finally been tied off. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Dinner tomorrow? I have someone I'd like you to meet. Business colleague, completely above board. Just thought you might enjoy the company." Victoria smiled as she typed back, "As long as he's not a lawyer." "Architect," came the immediate response. "Designing our Orlando hotel." "Brilliant, ethical, and I'm told quite handsome." Victoria laughed out loud, the sound echoing through her apartment. A year ago, the thought of meeting someone new would have terrified her. Now, the idea held a certain appeal. She was no longer the naive girl who had believed in fairy tales and happy endings, but she was also no longer the devastated victim who had thought she would never trust again. She was Victoria Campbell, successful, strong, complete on her own terms. And if someone worthy came into her life, someone who could love her for who she really was rather than what she could provide, then perhaps she might be open to that possibility. But this time, she would enter any relationship with her eyes wide open, her instincts sharp, and her heart protected by the wisdom that only comes from surviving betrayal and emerging stronger. As she prepared for bed that night, Victoria caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the tearful bride who had discovered her husband's deception on her wedding day. This woman had steel in her spine, intelligence in her eyes, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what she was worth. Matthew Reed had tried to destroy Victoria Campbell. Instead, he had forged her into something far more powerful than she had ever imagined she could be. And that, Victoria thought with deep satisfaction, was the best revenge of all.